Now it is time for the real enemy to fall. Religion, it is religion after all that dulls the minds of the people, and religion that justifies the corruptions of monarchs and churchmen. Now finally the tyranny over faith, over the minds of men, will be brought to an end. Already steps have been taken. The Christian calendar has been replaced by a new one in honor of the revolution. Now instead of a 7-day week with a Sabbath, there will be a 10-day week with a day of rest. Churches have been declared state property. Clergymen have been forced to swear allegiance to the nation. The laws based on Christian ethics have been revised. Today, though, the grand transformation will occur. Today, a new faith fit for the new nation will arise. And the greatest church in the land, which sits proudly at the heart of the capital city, the president and secretaries, the people's representatives, and the generals have already gathered. They, like the thickening crowd, are nervous with anticipation. Fortunately, they are not made to wait long. The ceremony begins, signaled by the eruption of dancing. It is ecstatic, convulsive throughout the pillared sanctuary. Bands of dancers gyrate, their movements accented by their near nakedness, bare-breasted with only slightest clothing. At the waist their stockings gathered at their feet. These nymphs-like beings leap and swirl. The flash of the sweat-glistened breast visible here. The arc well-muscled buttock rising there. It is erotic and thrilling to the crowd. Some are able to withstand it no longer. Quickly steered, unsuspecting partner to dark corner of the church to answer their rising lust. Then soared the trumpets, and all eyes turn at the center of the aisle of the church, at the ordinate entrance at the rear, and the grand procession. The dancing grows more frenzied, and into the view comes a woman, seated upon a chair that is borne aloft by poles on the shoulders of dozens of men. The woman wears a red cap. It is framed by a bright blue cape. She is heavily ruffed and nearly naked, and as she seems to float above the heads of her attendants, the crowd begins kissing the air in her direction. It is the due act of worship, for this woman is the goddess of reason. The adoration rises, the shouts of ecstasy, the explosion of voices deafening in the great stony expanse of the church as the procession continues. To the front of the crowd and slows, the goddess's chair is moved by her bearers and their shoulders to the large, high table that is objected of every seat in the church. This was once the high altar of the Christian church. It is now the throne of the goddess of reason. And as she takes her place at the assembly erupts into full-throated singing to the hymn to liberty. There are tears as hands are raised aloft in honor of the moment. With the hymn completed, the joyous celebration begins. Hypnotic pulsations of music explode at full volume, and there is mad heated dancing both within the church and around the bonfires outside. The crowd surrounding the building grows, pulsates, thrills, and from a liturgy is observed within. Canoers with pipes of tobacco jutting from their mouths serve at the altar of the goddess. Wheelbarrows of objects formerly used in Christian worship, censers, communion plates, crosses, and chandeliers are offered to the goddess, a reward for victory over all previous gods. Liquor is soon introduced into the celebration, and even children stumble about under its influence. Much the raucous amusement of the crowd, young girls don the vestments formerly used by Christian priests and dance about the room, taking the hands of men who were once clergymen, but who are now nearly entranced in the worship of the goddess, some believing that more than the Christian God is renounced, the more the goddess of reason reigns, shout obscenities to the Christian God and curse him as a fraud. As the day drifts in the dim light of the evening, the revelry spreads throughout the city, the gathering dark of night broken by fire's splashing light of ecstatic, dancing throngs. There is much to celebrate. All men know the truth now. The revolution is complete. The secular state is born. Reason reigns. The religion is dead. Long live the revolution. It was Karl Marx who said that a people without a heritage are easily persuaded. He might also have said that heritage forgotten and misremembered has the same effect in a few countries on this earth, is more starkly illustrated than in the United States. Under the press of the world events and a nagging sense of internal aimlessness, America today is struggling to divine who she is. Not surprisingly, the struggle often takes the form of a war of remembrance, a contest of competing visions of history. The combatants understand that while the past is indeed prologue, as Shakespeare wrote it, also prophecy, the nation will ultimately be defined by what she remembers herself to have been, whether the memory is factual or not. Nowhere is this proving truer than in the national memory of religion. In the vignette that opens this chapter, a secular state arises, purposefully casting off the shackles of traditional religion. Faith is outlawed, churches are confiscated, clergymen are made to renounce their vows, society is cleansed of all religious influence, and the foundation is laid for a legal system that will jealously guard the people against the encroachment of all gods. This is how the American Revolution is often remembered. In fact, it is not going too far to say that those who seek a secular America today is the founding vision the United States they believe was intended at least part of a rejection of European Christianity. Accordingly, the founding documents were carefully crafted to assure that the tyrannies of faith would never do the new nation what they had done to beleaguered kingdoms of the old world, that the First Amendment should erect an impenetrable wall of separation between the sacred and the secular, assuring that the former should never trouble the latter. It is exactly what the Founding Fathers hoped. Yet the scene that opens this chapter is not taken from an American Revolution, nor did anything of its kind ever occur during the American Revolution. It is instead an episode from the French Revolution. It was the French Revolution that angrily rejected Christianity, that enthroned a goddess of reason on the high altar of Notre Dame, and that sought to eradicate every vestige of Christian influence upon the law, the government, and the culture as a whole. Indeed, it was in the French Revolution the secular state was born. Nothing of the kind would have crossed the minds of the majority of the American Founding Fathers, though by November of 1793 the Notre Dame was renamed the Temple of Reason, and the actress was enthroned as a goddess upon the altar throne. The Americans had already issued the Declaration of Independence to the world, fought the Revolution, and crafted their Constitution with its Bill of Rights. Indeed, as news of the Revolution in France reached the American founders, most were repulsed. Writing to his friend the Marquis de Lafayette, who was embroiled in the events of the French Revolution at the time, Alexander Hamilton captured the honor of this generation, his generation of Americans. When I contemplate the horrid and systematic massacres of the Jacobins, when I find the doctrines of atheism openly advanced in this convention and heard when loud applause, I acknowledge that I am glad to believe there is no real resemblance between what was the cause of American and what is the cause of France, that the difference is no less great than the difference between liberty and licentiousness. Of course, not every of Hamilton's generation felt as they did. Founding fathers like Thomas Paine and Ethan Allen would later embrace the French values, may have looked back upon the reign of Notre Dame, goddess of reason, with longing. Still, the majority of American founders viewed the French experience as the very short sort of excess that sought to guard against in their own revolution. Despite such protests, the American Revolution is often misremembered as the French Revolution. From the classroom to the courtroom, the widespread fiction lives on, transforming the American Revolution into the anti-religion upheaval of secularist dreams. One of the most absurd expressions of this distortion came in the movie 1985 Revolution. Though it starred a brilliant Al Pacino and was directed by Hugh Hudson, fresh from an Oscar win of The Chariots of Fire, the film almost ruined the careers of both men. Perhaps part of the reason was from its peculiar portrayal of the American Revolution in French terms. Characters were about addressing each other as citizens and sporting the red caps of the Jacobins, who came to power in France nearly a decade after the events depicted in the film. property was confiscated, and sons of colonists were conscripted at gunpoint. Clergymen were treated with disdain, and the script goes to great pains to portray the decline of religion among the people. Clearly, this is the French experience transplanted to American soil with dramatic license, but it is not history. One suspects that such fabrications are the result neither of accident nor of ignorance. One suspects instead that the French revolutionary experience is often overlaid upon the American expenditure because some wish it were so. Because such revisionism is essential to creating a secular America. As Dean of American Conservatism, William Buckley Jr. said, "What we are up against is both the Academy and the judiciary is a felt disappointment. What the American Revolution was, not the French Revolution, and consequent attempt to Jacobinize the Constitution until religion and its influence are wholly banished from our public life." The truth is that the American colonial experience, the American Revolution, and the American founding documents were so shaped by traditional religion and intended as extensions of traditional religion as to be an embarrassment of the advocates of a secular American state. Thus the revolutionism, thus the borrowing of French legacy, thus the fabricated national memory that not only seeks to distort the official history of the nation, but which has also fueled a radical and destructive misreading of the 10 words of the American Bill of Rights. This said, it is not hard to understand why most Americans today have difficulty appreciating the depth and the grandeur of the religious passion that shaped the world of the Founding Fathers. We live in an age that patrons and privatized religion, is suspicious of zeal, and hardened by cynical religious gush, employed the public figures to cover a multitude of sins. We are in an age hungry for God, yet suspicious of how he is invoked by our neighbors. When we listen to the religious language of our fathers, then we find ourselves tempted to doubt them. It is hard for us to trust they believed what they wrote, and their great adventures were the offerings that God said they were. Yet consider this: in 1620, some 100 pilgrims, 1/3 of them children, boarded a ship no longer than a volleyball court and sailed it for 66 days across the North Atlantic. They had departed late in the year, so they arrived in the howling wilderness in New England during winter time, and they were only kept alive the help of some friendly Indians and their few remaining supplies from the ship. Still, half of them died during a starving time so severe that one family was untouched by the loss of a loved one. They passed the first winter, changed their farming methods in the spring, and brought in a good harvest the fall of 1621, and they survived. We remember them every Thanksgiving, and they are ennobled by their story. Naturally, our age wants to know, why did they do it? Was it to escape religious persecution? No. They weren't being persecuted in Holland, where they had lived for 12 years before they sailed. Was it for riches? No. There was no mention of this a motive in their journey, in their journals, and they had no reason to expect that wealth might come to them in the New World. When they considered the stories of the earlier settlements like Roanoke and Jamestown, what did they do? Why did they do it then? Well, they told us, but we have difficulty believing it. It is rarely mentioned in the textbooks and is scoffed at in more scholarly publications. Yet before these pilgrims disembarked their ship, the Mayflower, they signed a compact in which they said they sailed for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith. Given the evidence, it seems that it really was just a simple band of hundreds of Christians from a congregation in exile decided to try to carry the gospel of Jesus Christ to the New World. So they did the unimaginable. They crossed a stormy, freezing ocean for the glory of God. Our age longs to grasp such heroism, but we find ourselves skeptical and searching for some other, more accessible story. The same is true of the famous voyage to the New World spearheaded by John Winthrop, leading a flotilla of 5 ships filled with the Puritans across the Atlantic to build a Bible commonwealth. Winthrop ordered the ships tied up together a few days off the shore of England and then preached the most defining sermon in American history. His words frame what has come to be known as the American Covenant. Thus stands the cause between God and us, and we entered into covenant with him for this work. We have taken out a commission. The Lord hath given us leave to draw our own articles. Now if the Lord shall please to hear us and bring us peace in the place we desire, then hath he ratified this covenant and sealed our commission. For we must consider that we shall be a city upon a hill. The eyes of all the people are upon us, so that if we shall deal falsely with our God in this work we have undertaken, and so cause him to withdraw his present help from us, we shall be made a story and a byword throughout the world. Modern Americans read these words and are hard-pressed to believe that their forefathers seriously thought they had made a covenant with God for the new nation. Even more difficult to accept is that the words in the covenant lived on, renewed in the faith of passing generations of Americans. Indeed, when Ronald Reagan spoke with misty eyes about an American city upon a hill, he was out of step with his generation, and so he was roundly criticized, but he was very much in step with the faith of the founding generations. What we quickly come to understand that we delve into this founding era of America, we are visiting a foreign country of faith that is far removed from our own. The modern American views his faith as a private matter that makes no claims upon his neighbor. For those who settled in English colonies of America, though, faith was not a merely matter of the heart, to be lived out in seclusion without disturbing anyone. For them, faith was a commitment to God that came with a blueprint for changing the world. And it is the very matter of the muscular reach of colonial faith that helps to understand what was intended to the first 10 words to the American Bill of Rights. We must remember that the Mayflower sailed in 1620. It had only been 103 years since Luther posted his 95 Theses on the door of the Wittenberg Castle, 56 years since the death of John Calvin. The titanic matters of faith and question during the lifetimes of these giants were far more than the matters of heart alone. They were matters of truths by which men might live in this world. What Calvin and Luther engineered transformed men's understanding of government and law, church and education, even language and art. They battled for worldviews, and they had implications of every area of life. The early settlers of America were their spiritual children and carried them to the New World. The same sense that the Bibles under their arms were blueprints for the society they hoped to build. Nowhere was this more evident than in their thinking about government. Calvin had taught that while the church and the state were separate institutions, it was not true that one religious and the other was secular. Instead, Calvin taught that both church and state were instituted by God and were accountable to biblical truth. In other words, they were separate in function, but alike in faith. Both were religious entities, but both were ministries. The church was a ministry of the grace and the truth of God, the state a ministry of the justice of God. This theology of government is created a far cry from anything we expect faith to build today. For many years in colonial New England, a man involved in a lawsuit could plead his own case in court using the family Bible because the work of the state was biblically based as the work of the church. Each principle of law, each policy of government was carefully derived from Scripture. Indeed, in the early 1800s, a law student who had never been very religious found that he had to buy the Bible to fully understand the laws discussed in his textbooks. This was because each principle of law he encountered was attended by a long list of Scripture references, and the young law student was forced to look up each verse to understand what was being taught. In this time, the student digested so much Scripture that he underwent a religious conversion. This student's name was Charles Finley, and he became Billy Graham of his day. Yet his story faith is testament to the broad and beefy brand of religion that was laid at the foundation of this country. This essential difference between how we view religion today and how it was viewed in the decades from the first settlements through the American Revolution has more to do with the scope than its depth. Men may believe no less ardently today, but they do not expect what they believed to govern their actions in every area of life. We're used in compartmentalizing faith. A man does when he announces that because of his religion he is personally opposed to abortion or personally opposed to the war, but that he will vote the exact opposite if given a chance. The religious worldview of an American founding fathers would have had no room and less patience for such thinking. Truth was truth, and it was very true for every area of life. By the time thinking flowed down to the revolutionary generation, it had been filtered by experience, but it was no less influential. Our founders believed that good government meant reliance on religion for a variety of reasons. First, the matters of justice, of right and wrong. The government guards are defined by faith. Second, the individual character required of each citizen for successful society was rooted in faith, in the power of faith to restrain evil. Finally, the object to faith was God. And few living at the time of the American Revolution, of the framing of the founding documents, would have expected a society to thrive that did not honor God and seek His pleasure. Though he was writing a century after the creation of the United States, philosopher George Santayana understood the connection between religion and government that shaped the founding generation's worldview. His words are helpful, perhaps particularly because they come from outside the American colonial experience. It should be observed that if a systematic religion is true at all, intrusions on its part into politics is not only legitimate, but it is very work it comes into the world to do. Being by hypothesis enlightened supernaturally, it is able to survey the conditions and consequences of any kind of action much better than the wisest legislator, so that spheres of systematic religion and politics, far from being independent, are in principle identical, expressed in different terms. These sentiments spring readily from the lips and the pens of American founding fathers. Perhaps the best known statement of these ideas is found in George Washington's farewell address, written at the end of the public life and in the wake of the French Revolution. Washington's words about religion and citizenship were probably meant as a warning against the mood of atheism drifting from Europe. Of all dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. In vain that would man claim the tribute of patriotism who should labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness, and let us with caution indulge the superstition that morality can be maintained without religion, wherever may be conceded to influence redefined education on minds of peculiar structure, reason, and experience both.